There's this thing about the 47th floor. Nobody goes up there unless they were specifically invited. Nobody. So when the elevator doors opened and Patsy Bennett stepped out, clutching a constitutional law textbook like it was a life jacket, you already know she was not supposed to be there. Now look, she wasn't dumb. She was actually like one of the smartest people in her law school cohort, top 5%, no cap. The kind of girl who color codes her case briefs and still stress eats ramen at midnight. But smart people make one very specific kind of mistake. They trust the map. And Patsy's campus app had said, very clearly, room 47C Sky Garden Suite, reserved, her name, 2 p.m. It did not say anything about him. She almost didn't see him at first. That's the thing about Park Ha-jun. He didn't fill a room with noise. He filled it with weight. Like the air pressure changed when he was present and your body registered the danger before your brain did. Patsy's brain? Still loading. She pushed through the glass door, slightly out of breath, not even looking up. Ugh, okay, so I know I'm like 4 minutes late. And I'm sorry. I had a professor who literally cannot end a lecture on time to save his... She looked up. Life. Dead silence. She expected 3 other exhausted law students with cold coffee and highlighters. What she got was this man, sitting there, watching her, with the kind of patience that doesn't come from politeness, it comes from power. The kind of man who has never once been rushed in his entire life. And he was looking at her like she was the most interesting thing that had walked into his world in a very long time. He set down his document, leaned back, tilted his head, just slightly. "You're late." Patsy blinked. I think I have the wrong room." She turned toward the door. The handle didn't move. She tried again. Slower this time. Nothing. And that's when it hit her. The door hadn't locked when she walked in. It locked after. He didn't stand, didn't raise his voice, didn't even shift in his seat. "Sit down, Ms. Bennett. My associates arrive in 3 minutes. And as of right now, you're my attorney." Now, at this point, you might be thinking, girl, scream, yell. Throw that constitutional law textbook at his perfect white shirt and make some noise. Yeah, she thought about that too. But here's the thing nobody tells you about dangerous men with calm voices. They're not dangerous because they're loud. They're dangerous because they're already 3 moves ahead of whatever you're about to do. And Park Ha-jun? He'd been playing chess since before Patsy Bennett was born. The elevator dinged in the background. Multiple footsteps, getting closer. The door would open in 60 seconds. And Patsy had a choice. Be a law student who wandered into the wrong room and find out what happens to people who see too much. Or be an attorney. The best attorney she'd ever pretended to be. She didn't choose law school. Law school chose her. But this was something else entirely. She slowly straightened, squared her shoulders, hugged that textbook a little tighter, and sat down. "You're paying me double." For the first time, a real smile broke across his face. Just barely, just enough. Triple, if you survive. And look, I'm not going to pretend you're not already hooked. You want to know if she makes it out of that room. You want to know what triple even means in this man's world. So here's the deal. Patsy walked into a locked room with a Korean Mafia boss and 0 preparation, and she still sat down. The least you can do is hit subscribe. She'd honestly want you to. So let's back up for a second. Because you need to understand what Patsy Bennett's life looked like before the 47th floor changed everything. She was 24, final year of law school, $73,000 in student debt. A dad whose name she didn't put on applications because judges in this city still remembered what he did. She ate the same turkey sandwich 4 days a week because it was the cheapest thing near campus that wasn't gas station sushi. And every single morning, she told herself the same thing. Keep your head down, follow the rules, and none of that matters once you pass the bar. That was the plan. The plan did not include Park Ha-jun. So there she is, door locked, 60 seconds on the clock, and 3 of the most dangerous men in the city about to walk through that elevator, and Ha-jun is just sitting there, calm, like he didn't just trap a law student in a glass room 47 floors above street level, like this was Tuesday for him, which, honestly, it probably was. Ms. Bennett. His voice was quiet, the kind of quiet that makes you lean in without meaning to. You reviewed contracts last semester for Professor Lim's clinic. I know this because I funded that clinic. You argued a chain of title dispute in moot court and won on a technicality that 3 senior attorneys missed. He tilted his head. You'll be fine. Patsy stared at him. You've been watching me? I've been aware of you. He said it like there was a difference. There is a distinction. She did not have time to unpack that, because the elevator dinged. Look, here's what you need to understand about the men who walked into that room. These weren't street-level guys. They were the kind of men who wore custom suits and had lawyers on retainer, and still somehow made people disappear without a single charge ever sticking. The SEO faction. Ha-jun's biggest rivals, and, at least for today, his potential business partners on a warehouse acquisition deal worth $40 million. And they took one look at Patsy, pink cardigan, natural curls, constitutional law textbook, and the lead man, Mr. Seo, actually smirked. This is your counsel? Ha-jun didn't blink. She's the only one in this room who's read the full contract, which, based on what your team submitted, is more than I can say for your attorneys. That landed. SEO's smirk tightened, and Patsy, God bless her, felt something click. Not confidence exactly, more like cornered animal adrenaline, the same thing that got her through moot court, the same thing that got her through her dad's trial when she was 17 and had to sit in that gallery and keep her face completely still. She set her textbook on the table, opened it to absolutely nothing relevant, and started talking. The issue with Section 7C of your proposed addendum, she said, her voice even, is that it creates an ambiguous reversionary interest in the property that could be interpreted as a cloud on title under the Uniform Commercial Code. My client won't execute under those terms. We'd need a subordination clause and a clear estoppel certificate before we move forward. She didn't actually know if any of that applied to this contract. She was stitching together fragments from 6 different cases she'd studied and praying none of these men had passed the bar. They hadn't. SEO looked at his associate. His associate looked at the contract. There was a long, heavy pause. We can have revised terms by Friday. Patsy nodded slowly, like that was the only acceptable answer, and she'd never considered any other outcome. That works. The meeting wrapped in 20 minutes. The SEO faction left. The elevator closed. And the second those doors shut, Patsy's hands, which had been perfectly still on that table, started shaking under it. Ha-jun watched her for a moment. Then he said, almost quietly, "You were bluffing." "Completely," she said, every word. Something passed across his face. Not quite a smile, not quite respect. Something in between that she didn't have a word for yet. "Interesting," he said. She grabbed her textbook and stood up. "Okay, so, I'm gonna need you to unlock that door, I'm gonna need to go back to my actual life, and we're gonna need to both agree that this never happened. Sit down, Ms. Bennett." "I will not." "Sit down." She sat down. Here's where it gets complicated, because what happened next wasn't a threat, not exactly. Ha-jun slid a single sheet of paper across that glass table, and Patsy looked down at it, and her whole face changed. It was her student loan balance, printed out, to the dollar, $73,412. How did you... She stopped, took a breath. You know what, never mind. I don't want to know how you got that. 1 month, Ha-Jun said. You review contracts for my holdings company, legitimate contracts, mergers, property acquisitions, licensing agreements, nothing else. At the end of 30 days, the balance is cleared. All of it. Patsy looked at the number again, then at him. And if I say no? He considered this genuinely, like it was a fair question. Then you walk out that door, you go back to your turkey sandwiches and your moot court practices, and we never speak again. A pause. But you'll spend the next 15 years paying off that number on a public prosecutor's salary, and we both know it. She hated him a little bit for that. Not because it was a threat, because it was just true. I want it in writing, she said. Everything. Scope of work. E-timeline, payment structure, a non-disclosure that protects me as much as it protects you, and a clause that says I can walk if I see anything that crosses a legal or ethical line. He almost smiled. You negotiate well for someone who was shaking under the table 2 minutes ago. I wasn't shaking. Your left hand was. She said nothing. He pulled out a pre-drafted agreement, which told her he'd planned this whole thing, the locked door, the meeting, all of it, and slid it across. She read every line. Twice. Made him revise 2 clauses, initialed the changes herself, and then she signed it. She told herself it was survival, told herself it was strategic, told herself any reasonable person in her situation would have done the same thing. She told herself a lot of things on the elevator ride down, a Monday morning. Patsy showed up to Park Holdings' corporate office in her best blazer, the one she'd bought secondhand for job interviews, and immediately felt underdressed. Listen, she'd heard about this building. Everyone in the city had. 40 floors of glass and steel, lobby that looked like a modern art museum, receptionist who probably made more than her entire annual budget just to smile at people and hand out visitor badges. She knew what the outside looked like. She was not prepared for him in this context, because Ha-Jun at the 47th floor VIP lounge was dangerous and controlled. Ha-Jun in his own office was something else entirely. He moved through those halls like the building itself was an extension of his body. Quiet. Precise. Was every single person they passed either straightened up or found somewhere else to look? Not out of hatred, out of this specific kind of careful reverence that you only see when someone has earned their fear the hard way. His office was floor-to-ceiling glass on 2 sides, city sprawling out below like a map. Not a single personal item on the desk. No photos, no awards on the wall, nothing. Just clean lines and 1 very expensive pen. Patsy stood in the doorway for a second. You know most people have, like, a plant or something, maybe a coffee mug with a funny saying. Sit, he said, without looking up from his monitor. You really only have 2 modes, huh? Sit and you're late. He looked up then. That almost smile again. The contracts are on the desk. A flagged tabs are the sections that need review. I need your notes by 4. She sat. She worked. And here's the thing that started messing with her head. The contracts were actually clean. He's like genuinely, properly structured, legitimate business agreements. Property acquisitions in 3 states. A licensing deal with a tech firm in Austin. A merger with a mid-size logistics company that, on paper, was completely above board. She kept waiting to find the thing. The buried clause. The money laundering mechanism disguised as a consulting fee. The thing that would confirm everything she thought she knew about this man. It wasn't there, and she didn't know what to do with that. What she did know what to do with was the moment, around 2 p.m., When one of the senior associates, a guy named Daniel Cho, who had the specific energy of someone who'd been promoted slightly too fast, leaned over her temporary desk and said, loud enough for the open floor to hear, "So what exactly are you here for? You're not on the firm roster, you're not a partner, you're not even—" "She's with me." Hajun's voice came from across the room, calm, final. The sentence just ended the conversation. Daniel Cho straightened up so fast he nearly knocked over her water bottle. Hajun didn't even look at him. He was looking at Patsy, and there was something in that look. Not warmth exactly, but something territorial and quiet, that she chose, very deliberately, not to examine too closely. She went back to her contracts. She did not thank him. She also definitely noticed that nobody bothered her for the rest of the day. 3 weeks in, and Patsy had a routine. Show up at 8, work through lunch, him on his side of the office, her on hers. Leave by 6. Do it again. It was clinical, professional, exactly what the NDA outlined. And then came the merger. It was a complicated acquisition. Park Holdings absorbing a mid-size freight company with operations in 7 states. And the documentation was genuinely a beast. By 7 p.m., everyone else had gone home. By 9 p.m., they were still at it. Takeout containers spread across the glass conference table between stacks of exhibits and amended schedules. Hajun ate like he did everything else, deliberately, without making a big deal about it. Patsy ate like a person who'd been running on stress and coffee since 7 a.m. and had just remembered food existed. "You know," she said around a mouthful of lo mein, "normal bosses just let their employees go home. You're not my employee. I'm definitely not your employee." He actually paused at that, set down his chopsticks. Fair point. And then, because the room was quiet and it was late, and something about the low lighting made the whole thing feel a little more honest than it should have, he said, "The freight company has clean books because I've been preparing it for a legitimate acquisition for 2 years. Every subsidiary I've touched in the last 3 years has been on a restructuring path." Patsy looked up from her documents. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you've been looking for the crime in the paperwork since day 1. He said it without accusation, just observation. "And I'd rather you know there isn't one." She was quiet for a moment. "Your family doesn't want you to go legitimate." It wasn't a question. She'd picked it up from the way certain calls made him go completely still, from the names that appeared on organizational charts that didn't match any public business registration, from the way some of the older associates looked at her like she was standing too close to something that could burn her. He didn't deny it. "My uncle believes legitimacy is weakness. He thinks the moment you operate inside the law, you become subject to it." A pause. "He's not entirely wrong, but he's also not entirely right." "That's a very diplomatic way to describe a man who runs a criminal organization." "I run a criminal organization." "You're leaving a criminal organization." Something shifted in his expression. Not much, but enough. "Yes." Patsy looked at him across that table. Takeout containers and merger documents between them, city lights behind him, that one expensive pen sitting perfectly perpendicular to the edge of the desk. And for the first time since the 47th floor, she didn't see the locked door. She just saw someone exhausted from being exactly who everyone expected him to be. She went back to her documents, but she wasn't looking for the crime anymore. The gala was not her idea. Let's be very clear about that. Haijun had called it a business function. She'd called it a trap in formal wear. He'd said she needed to be present for the introduction of Park Holdings' new charitable foundation, the one that was, not coincidentally, a key part of his legitimization strategy. She'd said she wasn't his date. He'd said she wasn't his date. She was his legal counsel in attendance. She'd said that required a different dress. He'd sent one to her apartment the next morning without being asked. Midnight blue, perfectly fitted, deeply annoying in how well it worked. The gala was at the Whitmore, the kind of hotel that has a name everybody knows and a room rate nobody says out loud, string quartet in the lobby, open bar that nobody was actually drinking at because everyone there was too busy watching everyone else. Thus the kind of event where the charity is real but the networking is the whole point. Patsy stayed close to Ha-Jun's side the first hour because it was easier than pretending she knew anyone. He introduced her smoothly, "Ms. Bennett, my legal advisor," and she shook hands and smiled and did not say anything incriminating, which she was starting to think deserved its own line on her resume. And then Ha-Jun got pulled into a conversation with a city council member, and Patsy drifted toward the hors d'oeuvres table. And that's when she heard the voice. "So you're the one." She turned around. The woman was stunning in the way that money plus genetics plus a lifetime of being the most important person in every room produces. Sharp features, a red dress that had definitely cost more than Patsy's monthly rent, and the kind of smile that was all surface and no warmth whatsoever. Min Yura, Ha-Jun's former fiancée, daughter of the Min family, whose business interests overlapped with the Park family in ways that Patsy had read about in 3 separate corporate filings and definitely hadn't been thinking about. "I'm sorry," Patsy said, "the law student." Yura tilted her head, looking Patsy over the way people look at a price tag they find surprising. "I heard Ha-Jun had taken on a consultant. I assumed it was a joke." Patsy smiled. The specific smile she'd learned to use in courtrooms and depositions and every single family dinner after her dad's arrest. Polite, unreadable, and absolutely bulletproof. "Ms. Min, I've read about your family's holdings. Impressive portfolio." Yura's eyes narrowed just slightly. She hadn't expected that. "You're not what I expected." "People keep saying that." "You should be careful," Yura said, dropping the small talk like a mask. "Ha-Jun collects things, people. He always has, and he always moves on when he finds something new." "Good thing I'm his attorney and not his hobby," Patsy said. "Now, if you'll excuse me, he's not going to be able to protect you from his uncle." Yura said it quiet, almost kind. Almost. "Whatever he's promised you, it's not worth what's coming." Patsy held her gaze for 1 full second. "Thanks for the warning." And she walked away. She found Ha-Jun 10 minutes later. And she was going to tell him what Yura said. She genuinely was. But before she could open her mouth, Yura appeared across the room, and their eyes met, Ha-Jun's and Yura's. And something passed between them that Patsy couldn't read. And then Ha-Jun looked away from Yura, and looked at Patsy, and crossed the room toward her, deliberately, in front of every set of eyes in that gala. He stood beside her, not touching, not even close to touching. But the statement of it was unmistakable. Every person in that room who mattered saw exactly where he'd chosen to stand. She kept her face neutral. "You know every one of your enemies just clocked that, right?" "Yes," he said, "that was intentional." "Yes, that's honestly kind of reckless." He looked down at her, that almost smile. "Probably." And Patsy Bennett, who had a plan and a bar exam and a very clean moral framework that she had spent her entire life constructing, stood in a midnight blue dress in the Whitmore ballroom next to the most dangerous man she'd ever met, and thought very quietly. Anna, in the back of her mind, she usually kept under strict supervision. "Oh no, and if you've made it this far, no cap, you're already invested. You already want to know what Ha-Jun's uncle does next. You already want to know if Patsy's framework holds. So do yourself a favor, hit subscribe, and don't make me explain to you why you're gonna regret missing what comes next. She didn't get this far by hesitating. Don't you either. So here's where the story stops being about a locked door and starts being about everything behind it. The uncle's name was Park Sung-jin, and unlike Ha-jun, he didn't do the quiet thing. He didn't do the almost smile and the careful words and the deliberate patience. Sung-jin was old school, the kind of man who built the empire before Ha-jun inherited it, who believed that fear was the only currency that never devalued. He'd watched his nephew spend 3 years slowly, methodically trying to walk the family business into legitimacy, and he'd been patient about it. Mostly, the gala was the last straw. He found Patsy on a Tuesday, not at the office. That would have been too obvious, and Sung-jin didn't do obvious. He found her at the campus library, her world, the one place she still felt like herself. She was between the stacks on the 3rd floor, laptop open, highlighter in hand, when she looked up and found 2 men in dark coats standing at the end of the aisle. And then Sung-jin himself stepped around the corner. He was shorter than she expected. Compact. The kind of man whose physical size has nothing to do with how much space he takes up in a room. He sat down across from her like he'd been invited and folded his hands on the table. "Ms. Bennett," he said. His English was precise, deliberate. "I'll be brief." "Please," she said. "Because what else do you say?" "My nephew believes he can rebuild this family with clean hands." A pause. "He cannot, and the people who've tried to convince him otherwise don't tend to remain in the picture for very long." He looked at her steadily. "I think you're a smart girl, smart enough to know when you're being used." "I'm his legal consultant," Patsy said. Her voice was even. She was very proud of how even it was. "That's all." Sung-jin smiled. It did not reach his eyes. "Is it?" He slid a single manila envelope across the table. "Before you answer that, you might want to look at what's in there first." And then he stood, straightened his jacket, and left. She sat there for a full minute without touching it, just stared at it. Because some part of her already knew, the way you know a test result before you open the email, that whatever was in that envelope was going to change something she couldn't unchange. She opened it. It was a court document. Old, dated almost 25 years back. A case record involving a judge named Leonard Bennett, her father, and the Park family. Look, here's what Patsy had always known about her dad. He was a judge, he was corrupt, he took bribes, he got caught. He went to prison when she was 11, and she had spent every single day since then trying to be the opposite of him. That was the whole story. That was the whole reason she went to law school, the whole reason she wanted to be a prosecutor, the whole reason she cared so much about rules in a world that seemed to treat them as optional. What she had not known, what the document in her hands was now telling her, was that the man who'd paid her father, the man whose bribes had put cash in Judge Leonard Bennett's pocket and eventually put Leonard Bennett in handcuffs, was Park Dae-ho, Ha-jun's father. The Park family had been the ones to corrupt her father. And then, when he became a liability, the Park family had been the ones to expose him. They had built her father's ruin, and Ha-jun had known. He'd said he was aware of her. He'd funded Professor Lim's clinic. He'd had her student loan balance printed out to the dollar. He'd known exactly who she was from the second she walked through that door. She closed the envelope, packed up her laptop, and walked out of the library. She called him that night. He picked up on the second ring. "My father," she said. No hello, no preamble. Your father destroyed him. Silence on the other end, and the silence told her everything, because Ha-jun was never at a loss for words. He was quiet by choice. This was different. This was the quiet of someone who'd been waiting for a conversation they knew was coming. "Yes," he said finally, "and you knew who I was." "Yes." "From the beginning." "Yes." She didn't yell. That's the thing people don't understand about real anger. The deep kind, the betrayal kind. It doesn't come out loud. It comes out very, very quiet. "I'm done," she said. "The month is up anyway. Wire whatever you owe me and lose my number." She hung up. And she meant it. She genuinely, absolutely meant it. Which is why, 3 days later, she was standing in the elevator of Park Holdings at 8 a.m. with a resignation letter in her hand, because she was Patsy Bennett, and she did things properly, even when she was furious, and she was not going to ghost a legally binding NDA like some kind of amateur. The elevator opened on the executive floor, and immediately, something felt wrong. It was too quiet. Not the normal corporate morning quiet on set. Something tighter than that. The kind of quiet that has texture. While 2 of the regular security guards weren't at their posts. The receptionist's desk was empty. A coffee mug was sitting on the edge of a desk, still steaming, like whoever had been holding it had put it down fast. Patsy stood in the elevator lobby and did not move. And then she heard it. A sound from the far end of the hall. Not loud. More like a scuffle. Something falling. And then Ha-jun's assistant, a woman named Miss Yoon who had never, in 3 weeks, looked anything other than perfectly composed, came sprinting around the corner in heels, grabbed Patsy's arm and said, "We have to go, now." "What is happening?" "The building's going into lockdown, Mr. Park. Someone got to the water in his private office. We think it was in the—" She stopped, pressed her lips together. "He's been poisoned. His uncle's people are already in the building." The coup, Yura had warned her. Standing in that gala in that red dress, she'd said it's not worth what's coming, and Patsy had walked away and filed it under things dangerous women say to intimidate. Competition, and she had been wrong. "Where is he?" Patsy said. "Miss Bennett, you need to leave." "Where is he?" He was in the executive conference room, and he was bad. Not unconscious, not yet, but the kind of bad where a person is using every ounce of what they have just to stay upright. He was sitting against the wall, jacket off, one hand pressed to the floor like he needed the ground to confirm it was still there. 2 of his men were with him. Both of them looked at Patsy when she came through the door like she was either the best or worst thing that could have walked in. Ha-jun looked up at her. "You should not be here," he said. His voice was thinner than she'd ever heard it. It hit different, wrong, like a sound out of place. "Yeah, well?" She crouched down in front of him, checked his pulse, fast, irregular. His skin was clammy. "I came to resign. Bad timing." "Patsy." "Don't." She stood up, looked at his 2 men. "The server room, 2 floors down. It's the most structurally reinforced space in the building. I know because I read the building's legal disclosures in the Chapter 1 acquisition filing. Blast-rated walls, internal climate control, separate power grid. Can he walk?" One of the men, broad, quiet, who she'd seen around the office but never spoken to, looked at her for exactly 1 second, then looked at Ha-jun. Ha-jun gave the smallest possible nod. "He can walk," the man said. Then let's go." They heard the first team breach the stairwell door 2 floors above them while they were moving. Heavy boots, multiple people. Not subtle. They weren't trying to be subtle anymore, which meant they weren't worried about witnesses, which was a specific kind of terrifying that Patsy chose not to think about directly. They made it to the server room. She pulled the door shut, engaged the manual bolt, the kind that required a physical key from the outside, and then stood in the humming blue light of 40 server racks and tried to remember how to breathe. Ha-Jun slid down against the wall again. His jaw was tight. He was fighting it, whatever they'd given him, with the same stubborn stillness he brought to everything. "The building's security system," Patsy said. "I'm pulling up the emergency management terminal on the room's internal monitor. I need the override code." "Patsy, Ha-Jun." She looked at him directly. "I read every document in this building's acquisition file. I know this terminal can lock every elevator, seal every fire door, and cut power to specific floors independently. I need the override code, and I need it right now." He looked at her for a long moment. Something moved through his expression. Complicated, layered, the look of a man recalculating something he thought he already understood. He gave her the code. She turned back to the terminal and got to work. Here's the thing nobody talks about when they talk about survival situations. It's not the fear that gets you. Fear's actually useful. Fear sharpens you up, clears the noise, makes everything very simple very fast. What gets you is the moment after the immediate danger, when your brain catches up with your body and you realize what you just did. Patsy did not have time for that moment. She was going to have it later. Right now, she was locking elevator shafts and cutting power to floors 3 through 7 and rerouting the building's emergency comms to loop an all-clear signal to the external security feed, which was, she was aware, extremely illegal and absolutely necessary. She got Ha-Jun's men positioned, gave them a 3-minute window, told them what she needed. And then the server room door took a hit from the outside, one hard impact that meant they'd found them. And Patsy looked at the building schematic on the monitor and found the one route nobody would expect. Up. The rooftop helipad was 2 floors above them via a maintenance corridor that didn't show on the public building directory because it was only in the original construction filing, which Patsy had read because she reads everything, and which was about to save both their lives. Getting Ha-Jun up those 2 flights was not graceful. He was heavier than he looked and running on fumes, and she was in business casual, and her shoulder was going to be absolutely destroyed tomorrow. But he moved, grimly, stubbornly, one step at a time, his hand on her shoulder and her hand on his waist, and neither of them saying a word about it. They were halfway up the maintenance corridor when the door at the bottom opened. One guy. Fast. He cleared the distance faster than she expected. Ha-Jun tried to turn, and she could see it was costing him everything he had left. So she grabbed the fire extinguisher mounted on the wall, big, red, heavy, and swung it. It connected. The guy went down. She stood there for a second, extinguisher in hand, heart doing something completely unhinged in her chest. "Okay," she said mostly to herself. "Okay, Patsy. I'm fine, keep moving." The rooftop was cold and loud, and the chopper was already there. One of Ha-Jun's, scrambled by Ms. Yoon before the lockdown completed, rotors cutting the air into something that made it hard to think. The pilot was gesturing urgently. They had maybe 90 seconds before the building's external security. The real kind, the kind that answered to the city, responded to the breach alert. Ha-Jun made it to the helipad edge and then stopped, turned to her. And even like this, pale, barely standing, expensive shirt a mess, he looked at her with those completely steady eyes and said, "You need to go back down. Tell them you were a hostage. You have the NDA, you have legal cover. If you get on this chopper, that cover's gone. Get in the helicopter, Ha-Jun. I'm serious. You came here to resign. You can still—" "Ha-Jun," she grabbed his arm. "I swung a fire extinguisher at a man in a stairwell. I hacked your building's security grid. I have been complicit in approximately 14 things that would make my constitutional law professor cry." She looked at him. "I'm already in the chopper. Let's just physically get in the chopper." He looked at her. really looked at her. The way he'd looked at her in that VIP lounge, like she was the most interesting thing that had walked into his world. "You're going to be the end of me," he said quietly. "Probably," she said. "Get in." He was in the hospital for 9 days. She was there for 8 of them. She told herself it was because she needed to debrief with his legal team, and there were approximately 40 things in motion that required her input, and she was, contractually, still his advisor until the paperwork was formally dissolved. On day 7, he woke up clear-eyed and looked at her sitting in the chair by the window with her laptop and a cold coffee and said, "You don't have to be here." "I know," she said without looking up. "I mean it. The danger is, it's contained. My uncle's been removed. His team's been dealt with. You're not in any—" "Hajun," she looked up. "I know." He was quiet for a moment. "I should have told you about your father." "Yeah, you should have. I knew about the connection before you walked through that door. I told myself I chose you because of your skill set. That the rest of it was—" He paused. "I don't have a clean explanation for it. I just knew who you were, and I wanted to see who you'd become despite it." Patsy set the laptop down, looked at him. "It's either the most manipulative thing you've ever said to me or the most honest. Probably both." "Yeah." She picked up the laptop again. "Probably both." A pause. "I want you to walk away from this," he said. "Clean slate. The loan's cleared. It was cleared the day you signed. I'll have my attorneys draft a full release. No NDA, no obligations, nothing. You can go take the bar, become a prosecutor, do everything you planned." She thought about it, genuinely. Sat with it the way she sat with hard questions on exams, turning it over, checking the edges, looking for the answer that held up under pressure. "The thing is," she said slowly, "I went to law school to prove I wasn't my father. To prove that somebody in our family could do it right. Follow the rules. Stay clean." She paused. "But I've spent the last 2 months watching you try to build something legitimate out of something broken, and I've watched your own family try to tear you down for it. And I keep thinking, the law I wanted to practice, it doesn't really protect people like you, or people like me, honestly. It just manages us." Hajun didn't say anything. He was listening the way he always listened. Completely. I'm not saying I'm okay with everything," she said. "I'm not. There's a lot we're gonna have to figure out, but I'm not going back to black and white. I've seen too much gray." She met his eyes. "So, what does the legitimate version of Park Holdings actually need?" The almost smile. "Slow this time. Real." "A CEO," he said. 1 year later. The boardroom of Park Holdings looked different with morning light coming through those floor-to-ceiling windows. Cleaner, somehow. Like the building itself had exhaled. Patsy Bennett stood at the head of the table in a charcoal blazer, no more second-hand, and raised her right hand, and the city's most prominent corporate attorney swore her in as Chief Executive Officer of Park Holdings, Incorporated, fully divested of its legacy assets, legally restructured, publicly registered. Clean. Every person in that room was watching her. Except one. Hajun was at the back. No seat at the table. He'd insisted on that, said it would send the wrong signal to the board, which was very strategically correct and also very him. He was standing by the far wall with his hands in his pockets and that watch catching the light, and he was watching her the way he'd watched her from across a glass table on the 47th floor the first day she'd stumbled into his life. Like she was the most interesting thing in the room. She didn't look at him during the ceremony. She kept her eyes forward, her voice steady, her hand raised. Patsy Bennett. Just who color-coded her case briefs and stress-ate a Raymond and had $73,000 in debt and a father whose name she'd spent years trying to outrun. swore herself in as the CEO of one of the city's most powerful holding companies. And when it was done, when the room broke into applause and people moved forward to shake her hand, she caught Ha-jun's eye across the room. He nodded, small, quiet, everything in it. She smiled back. Just barely. Just enough. An hour later, the black car was waiting outside. She slid into the passenger seat. He was already there. Neither of them said anything for a long moment. The city moved past the windows. Loud, indifferent, beautiful. "So," she said finally. "So," he said. "Partners, partners." She looked out the window. "You know this is insane, right?" "Completely," he said. "Like, objectively, from every angle." "Patsy." "Yeah, I know." She let out a breath, leaned back against the seat, and for the first time in a very, very long time, Patsy Bennett stopped making a plan and just let the car move. And here's what this story is actually about, if you strip everything away. The locked doors, the contracts, the fire extinguisher, all of it. It's about what happens when the rules you built your whole life around stop being enough. Patsy didn't abandon her values. She expanded them. She learned that justice and the law aren't always the same thing, that doing good in a broken system sometimes requires you to understand the system from the inside, and that the most dangerous thing you can do sometimes is walk into a room you weren't invited to and refuse to leave until you've changed it. That's a lesson that hits different no matter who you are. So if this story got you thinking, if it pulled you in, if you stayed all the way to this last moment, you already know what to do. Like this video, subscribe, because there are more stories where this one came from and you do not want to miss what's next. And drop a comment. Tell me what got you. Tell me if you were rooting for Patsy from the beginning or if Ha-jun won you over somewhere along the way. Because honestly, this story was always about both of them, and so is the next one.